Hello and welcome to today's online forum. Thanks so much for joining us. We're going to wait just a few seconds to give everyone the chance to get connected, but we'll begin in just a moment. So thanks for your patience. Hello again and welcome. Thanks so much for joining us today. My name is Kyle Johnson. I'm the editorial events manager at the Chronicle of Philanthropy. We're excited for this conversation, and we'd like to thank CCS Fundraising and the Lilly School of Philanthropy for helping to make this event possible. I have just a few housekeeping notes to share. Your audio, video, and chat are turned off to streamline the presentation. However, we welcome questions at any time, so please submit those using the Q&A box. We'll get to as many as we can toward the end of the session. And finally, today's online forum is being recorded and will be available in a few days. So be on the lookout for an email from the Chronicle letting you know that that recording is ready. At this time, I'm pleased to introduce our host for today's conversation, Jim Rendon. He is a senior writer at the Chronicle of Philanthropy. So Jim, I will turn it to you now. Thanks so much, everyone.
All right, thanks, Kyle. Hi, everybody. So I'd like to thank everybody for joining us today. I'm excited to moderate today's discussion, and I'm pleased to welcome our guest, Dr. Elisha Smith Arrillaga, President of Research at the Center for Elective Philanthropy. Elisha, can you tell us a little bit about you and your organization?
Sure. Hi, Jim, and thanks so much for having me today. I'm at the Center for Effective Philanthropy, which works with foundations both in the U.S. and around the world to help their giving be more effective. And super excited to talk today about our research on MacKenzie Scott's giving.
Great, thank you. I'd also like to welcome Kendra Davenport, President and CEO of Easter Seals. Kendra, can you tell us a bit about your work?
Hi, Jim. Nice to meet you. Nice to be here. I am President and CEO of Easter Seals National Office. Easter Seals is about a 105-year-old organization. We exist to provide people of all ages with all disabilities support, services, and programs so they can lead their best lives. We also serve seniors and veterans through our network of about 70 affiliates who employ about 32,000 people.
Great, thanks. And finally, I'd like to welcome Dr. Cecilia Conrad, CEO of Lever for Change. While Cecilia won't comment on internal decision-making processes of any of the Lever for Change clients or their motivations for giving, she is happy to tell us all about the open call model that certain donors have used with them and the tremendous impact of their funding and the latest trends she's observing in the philanthropic sector. Cecilia, could you tell us a little bit about yourself and your work?
Yes, hello. It's wonderful to be here. I am the founding CEO of Lever for Change, which is a 5-year-old nonprofit. We work to connect donors with bold solutions to accelerate solutions to some of the world's most compelling problems. And we do that through an open call model. We've worked with both MacKenzie Scott and also Melinda French Gates to run challenges on their behalf.
Great, thank you. So MacKenzie Scott and Melinda French Gates are two of the most talked about people in philanthropy today. Both women have signed the Giving Pledge. They're committed to giving away vast sums. Scott has already given away $17.3 billion since 2019. We also know that the two women are friends and they seek advice from one another. And together they are challenging many of the norms in philanthropy. But it would be wrong to lump them together. Scott is private, but she discloses her grant recipients through yield giving. And those groups work on a broad range of issues. French Gates uses the media to spotlight her cause, the empowerment of women and girls, but until recently hasn't really talked a lot about her grantees or disclosed much. And when it comes to trust-based philanthropy, a movement to give grant recipients more power, they share a lot in common. Scott gives huge gifts with no restrictions and shuns reporting requirements. Scott uses Lever for Change for an open call to get funding to groups that are often overlooked by big grant makers. French Gates is using the same group for an open call, and recently she made gifts to individuals, enabling them to give to any charities they want. Together, they're using different pathways to affect important changes in philanthropy. So, Elisha, let me start with you. When MacKenzie Scott first started giving out big unrestricted gifts to smaller nonprofits, some grant makers worried that her gifts would spark financial or operational challenges at groups. Those groups have often been overlooked by big grant makers. Your research found that those concerns were unfounded. Can you tell us a bit about your findings?
Sure, Jim. So at the Center for Effective Philanthropy, we started studying a little over 2 years ago all the recipients of Scott's gifts through not the open call process, but those who were, received the phone call and found out they received a gift. And so we've surveyed now twice and are in the process actually of doing a third round of the study, which will be out next February. But we've surveyed all of the nonprofits who received gifts that way from Scott. And our knowledge to date is that we're the only organization who has that data. And of the over 600 organizations that responded, what we learned from them, we learned a lot. Three, I would say, key things are that these gifts have really been transformational, that there have been huge impacts on communities, and that a lot of the fears around the financial cliff that folks feared would happen have really been unfounded. So, just in terms of the transformation that these gifts have made, nearly 80% of organizations that received a gift from Scott are using those gifts to engage in new programmatic work. They're reaching broader groups of individuals. They're taking more risk and funding more test programs. For instance, one organization talked about using the funds from Scott to increase services for their clients in the greatest need. So they were going from receiving one meal a day to providing breakfast in addition to that one meal. Another organization talked about launching a program to develop an entrepreneurial leadership camp for Black and Brown business owners or those who are budding entrepreneurs. And the impacts are also that organizations talk about on their communities are really strong. 90% of leaders report that their organization used some of the grant money to advance equity. And one organization, for instance, talked about increasing the number of people they served by 30%. Because with Scott's grant, they were able to serve a larger population of reentry folks, is what they share with us. And then just in terms of the financial cliff, there were a lot of conversations about organizations receiving these funds and, questions about like what happens over that time period. And one of the most powerful things that we heard from organizations about this gift was the fact that there was no time limit in which the funds needed to be spent, which is just fundamentally different from how grants traditionally have worked. And so what we heard from leaders that we surveyed is that 90% of the leaders believe that the grant will strengthen their organization's long-term financial stability. And when we asked leaders what challenges, if any, they encountered, 80% report they've encountered no challenges with use of the grant, and only 2% reported major challenges. So really, what we have heard in the last 2 years from organizations that receive these grants is that there are powerful levers for change, and that also that they can be really powerful in even helping with future fundraising as well.
Great, thank you. Kendra, 22 Easter Seals affiliates received gifts from MacKenzie Scott in 2020. Can you talk a little bit about how they've used those gifts and what those gifts have meant for the organization?
Yeah, absolutely. Our experience, I think, across the board is very much in line with what Elisha and the Center for Effective Philanthropy's findings have been. The gifts were transformative. They allowed some of our 70 affiliates, those who received them, to invest in capital programs, to invest in construction, to expand certain programs where the need was greatest, to ideate about things that they have wanted to do but lacked the capital to do. In many ways, I think gifts like this rejuvenate older nonprofits or more expansive nonprofits like Easter Seals. And then for more nascent, smaller nonprofits, I think they really give them the latitude to do things that are innovative. I've been in the nonprofit sector for 36 years and much has changed. One of the things that hasn't changed is the amount of time nonprofit professionals dedicate and have to devote to raising money every day. That takes away time they could be spending doing innovative things, expanding programs, reestablishing a presence in an area where maybe they didn't have the funds to actually be. So I think top to bottom, our smaller affiliates that receive the funding, as well as our larger, benefited in a terrific number of ways and really became more stable as a result of the investment.
Yeah. Could you talk a little bit about some of the differences in how you saw some of the smaller groups use the funds versus the larger ones?
Mm-hmm. Well, I think, Easter Seals writ large and the national office had benefited as well. Some of our larger affiliates invested in major projects, whereas some of the smaller ones, maybe they put money away or set it aside for future rainy days or difficulty. There is a constant ebb and flow in the nonprofit world. And I think across the board at Easter Seals, probably the most significant issue we face is paying direct service professionals, caregivers. Many invested in that so that they were able to pay more people to provide services to people in need, regardless of their age or disability, whether they were a senior or a veteran. All of those programs benefited. When you look right now at some of the things Melinda French Gates and MacKenzie Scott are doing, especially Melinda's prioritization of caregiving, it's really heartening to an organization like Easter Seals because caregiving in the United States is a massive crisis that it's almost like a slow moving train. We all know it's happening and it's all around us, but we're not able to, get from point A to point B, pay more direct service professionals, create a mechanism where family members who quit their jobs to care for aging parents or children with disabilities are able to have an income. This is a real problem across America. And for Easter Seals, it's a huge issue. So I look at transformative gifts like this as an extension of our own ability, nonprofits' ability to solve some of the biggest problems in the nation.
Yeah, that's great. Cecilia, this year, Lever for Change administered a competition to award $1 million grants from MacKenzie Scott to 250 community organizations. And I know that wound up being a little different than the idea going in. Your group is going to run a similar competition for Melinda French Gates. Can you talk a bit about how the open call works, the ways that sort of challenges traditional grant making and some of the benefits that you've seen stem from that?
Yes. So Lever for Change supports donors of all types who want to use an open call, sometimes as a substitute for, sometimes as a complement for more traditional kind of invitation-only grant-making processes. And we design these, and Yield Giving Open Call fill in this as well, to be open, transparent, focus on equity, and have a lot of rigor. So it's a multi-step process. First step is a careful design to get the donor to help identify the criteria that will be used to evaluate those proposals. And we try to push those criteria to give as much scope as possible to the organizations to define their own work and strategy. So in the Yield Giving Open Call, the focus was community-led, community-focused nonprofit organizations with a strong track record of impact. But beyond that, we let the organizations define their own work. And the next piece of this is that in order to truly be open, you need to be transparent about what those criteria are. So we make those available in public, and also to try and reach as many organizations as possible to let them know that the opportunity exists. It isn't really an open call if you don't know about it or the window to apply is too short. So we really emphasize that. After that, the applications go through a rigorous process that begins with a participatory review, where all of the applicants actually review other applicants using that scoring criteria and give commentary. And then from there, it goes to a panel of kind of expert review. Experts could be in a specific subject area, but they're also represent a kind of diverse group drawn from multiple sectors and with different lived experiences. And those reviewers also give feedback to the organizations. So one of the benefits in participating in our process is that you get feedback, and that's something that organizations tell us they highly value. And then finally, as a final stage in the yield giving open call, the most highly ranked proposals received additional financial due diligence before the actual awards were announced. Now, this process differentiates itself from that invitation only in several ways. The first is just that openness and transparency, which creates opportunities for organizations that maybe aren't plugged in to big foundations or to traditional philanthropic networks. Maybe they didn't go to the same university as a board member or a program officer. So it opens doors for organizations. And when you open doors, you're also giving the funders some more confidence that they're actually seeing the best ideas in organizations. So when we do closed processes, they can be easier to manage and they can seem lower cost, but it comes at a cost that you don't know that you've gotten some of the best ideas. We feel like an open call helps you do that. Finally, I mean, not finally, but one of the second things is that with an open call, and particularly the way we've worked to design those with yield giving and open call and others, donors are kind of giving trust to the community organizations and valuing their knowledge by giving them the space and the scope to define the work. And then there's another piece to this, and that is that it's also expanding who gets to participate in decision making, because we have these panels who review them. And then finally, the third thing I'd note is just the scale of commitment that we've seen from both MacKenzie Scott and from Melinda French Gate. As you said at the outset, yield giving was originally, the yield giving open call was going to give out $251 million awards. And the organizations that it was targeting had budgets between 1 and 5 million. So 1 million is a big gift, a potentially transformational gift. In the end, though, 279 organizations received 2 million each, and 82 received 1 million each. And what, for me, this really is a testimony that when you do an open call, you'll find organizations that otherwise might not have come to your attention, to the larger philanthropic community. And those organizations are all available on the Yield Giving website for people who want to learn more about them.
Great. Could you talk a little bit about sort of, how you see that as kind of different than the traditional grant making process? Like, what is it about this when you were sort of thinking about designing this, doing this kind of work? What was it about the way big foundations give out funds that you wanted to do differently? Like, what are you trying to change in this process? Because it is very, very different than what you would see from, just your sort of, 5 or 10 largest foundations and how they do grant making. But were there particular things you saw in that process that you thought, oh, that's not really working well, or that's not reaching everybody, wherever it is that you really wanted to challenge and do differently through this process?
Yes, I'll say that when we designed this model, we started with a couple of goals. One was to transfer some of the decision making about where foundations spend their money and what are the problems they should work on and what organizations receive it, to move some of that decision making outside of the foundation and the program staff as a part of way of sharing decision making power over that. And we also wanted to design a process that could increase equity in grant making. When I looked at the traditional philanthropic processes, and I should note, I came from outside of philanthropy, I came from academia, and I had not quite comprehended what a closed door process most grant making is. The vast majority of funding opportunities are invitation only. So you need to know about them, which means you need to have a connection, or the foundation or the needs to know about you. So we wanted to shift that a bit. So we designed this notion of openness to be open not only to organizations that maybe we didn't know before, but also to ideas that we didn't know before, and in some cases to collaborations that we didn't know about before. So that was one of the big mantras for designing this process. We recognize, though, when you ask people to go beyond the set of things they know about, you need to provide them with good information. You need to provide them with confidence and rigor so that they feel like they're making a good choice.
Right. I'm curious, Kendra, on the nonprofit side of this, what your thoughts are. I mean, do you think that does that process sort of, seem like a good direction to go? Is it kind of solving problems that Easter Seals organizations run into when it comes to getting grant money?
Oh, I think absolutely. I think Cecilia hit the nail on the head when she said that most grant making processes are closed. They're invitation only. That leaves many nonprofits, Easter Seals included, in this abyss. You're trying really hard. You have great programs. You're doing good things. But how do you access the funding that will continue to support those things, will enable you to expand them or to do something new or to address the needs of a new emerging problem? It's very difficult. And I think it really levels the playing field for smaller nonprofits versus larger. Many smaller don't have a development team, let alone a successful seasoned grant writer to develop proposals that are compelling. What Lever for Change is doing is really taking that issue off the table for smaller NGOs and making them, equally competitive with larger NGOs that have, substantive development teams. But I think more important than any of that is a commitment to putting the work that nonprofits do and do successfully at the forefront, not making the nonprofits justify their existence in the work they may have been doing for a matter of years and making a terrific impact, or a matter of decades. It's really saying, we see you. We see what you're doing. We believe in what you're doing. And we believe that the 10% of the American population that comprise the nonprofits, the employment that nonprofits do comprises rather 10% of the American working population, and does an awful lot of good. I think what these philanthropic investors are saying is, we see that, we are investing in that because we're trusting the work you're doing. And it's highly motivational for nonprofits. It isn't easy to work in a nonprofit because, as I said at the top of this webinar, it sometimes feels like 9/10 of your job is coming up with the funding to do your job, to do the programs, to keep things going. This really eliminates that burden in a massive way and allows nonprofits the breathing room they need to reinvest, to rejuvenate, to stabilize. It's really, it's one of the most exciting things I think I've ever seen in my career.
That's great. Thank you. Elisha, I'm curious if you have thoughts on that model. I know certainly not all of the grantees that you were looking at in your research. And actually, I don't know if that group was included in your research in terms of the timing, but, do you have thoughts on sort of that model and how that is, kind of just opening the doors to different kinds of organizations, different ways of giving money, different ways of engaging with philanthropy?
Yeah, I mean, our work really focused on all the organizations who were part of the invite-only process, not the Lever for Change process. But I think there's a lot to be learned in terms of the different methods used. And, what we heard from grantees and what was so distinct, even about the invite-only process, was just the lack of very few application requirements, right? Like, most people were just contacted, maybe ask for some financials, an annual report, some other data around impact. So, the burden in terms of filling out the application was a lot less. And then the reporting requirements are minimal to none. And then, as I mentioned before, like the lack of time in which the funds might be spent. Those three pieces are things that are just fundamentally different from the way that other processes work. And, thinking about the work that nonprofits are doing daily is so important. That work is so important. Instead of spending so much time like doing some of those things that I just mentioned. So I think, but we see that these two processes have different, there's an application with the Lever for Change process. There's not an application with the invite-only process. And so, I think there are different things to weigh with each of these, just in terms of like, exactly what Kendra was speaking to in terms of time that it takes to be able to receive these kinds of grants.
Could I pick up something there, Jim?
Yeah, sure.
Okay, I wanted to pick up on 2 points because one of the aspects of the open call approach was that there was an application. And so some contrasted that with the other method of giving. As I said, you need an application if you're trying to get organizations that people may not know already. But one of the challenges is trying to think carefully about asking what's critical to the decision, because small organizations, as was noted earlier, tend not to have development staff. So we were really, as we tried to design that application, we tried to draw from information we thought nonprofits would already have in hand, from annual reports or mission statements and things like that. But it's something there is a trade-off, and it's important to be attentive to it, because we do want to make sure that these smaller organizations don't face a disadvantage in the process.
Great. Well, thanks, everybody. We're going to take a brief pause here to give Stacy Palmer, our CEO with the Chronicle of Philanthropy, the chance to chat with Jacqueline Ackerman of the Lilly School of Philanthropy. And we'll be back to continue our conversation in just a few minutes. Stacy, I'll hand it over to you.
Thanks so much, Jim. And what a wonderful conversation this has been. I am thrilled today that we get to talk to an expert on women's giving. And I'm thrilled that Jacqueline Ackerman is able to be here with us. Would you like to tell us a little bit about yourself before I start asking you a few questions?
Sure. Thank you, Stacy and Chronicle for having me. I'm interim director of the Women's Philanthropy Institute. Our institute is housed at the Indiana University Lilly Family School of Philanthropy, which many of you know is a global leader in philanthropic studies. Our institute, WPI specifically, seeks to increase the understanding of women's philanthropy, primarily through rigorous research and education. So we work to interpret and share our research insights broadly to improve philanthropy and to help better engage women donors.
And what an incredible time this is when it comes to talking about women's philanthropy, especially the two women we're talking about today. But I want to widen the lens a little bit. You study what women are doing, and I'm curious what you think, looking at Melinda French Gates, MacKenzie Scott. Is there giving like other women that you study, or is it very different? What are the patterns that you see both in very affluent women donors and everyday donors?
Sure. Thank you so much for starting us off with this question. The Women's Philanthropy Institute has been conducting research on gender and philanthropy for over 15 years. And so we've got a broad base of information to pull from. And what we've seen is that both MacKenzie Scott and Melinda French Gates exemplify some key characteristics of women's philanthropy, both when we're looking at affluent donors and when we're looking at everyday donors. So I'll start with affluent women. We did an interview-based study a few years ago that showed that, of course, while every donor's story and path to giving is unique, these women often have some similar steps in that journey to philanthropy. And both Melinda and MacKenzie reflect this in different ways. So they both learned about philanthropy young, even before they became as wealthy as they are today. They have firm beliefs that were ingrained in childhood that being wealthy comes with a certain responsibility to give back. And they have taken it upon themselves. This self-education process is really important for affluent women who are entering into this phase of philanthropy in their lives. They're educating themselves by conversing with others, by digging into the research about the areas that they care about giving to. And then finally, they're investing in systems level change. So affluent women donors are often approaching their philanthropy in a collaborative, strategic, and often now a trust-based lens. You see that with MacKenzie Scott, with her rapid, unrestricted giving, allowing the recipients to use the funds in the way that seems best to them. You see this with Melinda French Gates. She has kind of historically sought to address root causes, look at creating sustainable change. And then her more recent commitments have also reflected this collaborative, trust-based philanthropy framework with unrestricted giving and the open call that has been discussed already this hour. But I'm really glad that you asked about everyday women donors, because we spend so much time talking about billionaire women donors in reality, a lot of our organizations have to engage a broader set of women to successfully fundraise and pursue our missions. And our research has uncovered some really consistent findings about these women donors. So we know women are more likely to give and more likely to give higher amounts compared to similarly situated men. Women also give differently. They give out of empathy and a desire to support individuals and communities directly. And of course, I've mentioned collaborative giving, and they tend to prioritize the causes that resonate with them. As a result, we know that women are more likely to support women's and girls' causes. And we know at WPI that philanthropy and generosity unite women across income, wealth, and across other demographic measures. So MacKenzie Scott and Melinda French Gates, yes, they can give more in terms of dollars, but the why, the where, and the how of their giving aligns with so many generous women across this country and around the world.
And I think they definitely have inspired many to think about giving even more. One of the things that I see connecting them is the fact that they really are interested in giving to causes that other folks have long neglected. And that's such an important area. Throughout this conversation, we've talked about the groups that have no access to philanthropists in various ways. I would say, I'm very impressed about the impact on causes that affect women and girls, because that's not an area, your studies have shown that area does not get very much money. Could you tell us what you think the transformative effect could be of the fact that we're seeing so much more attention to women and girls' causes?
Yeah, Melinda French Gates's really persistent over the last couple of decades focus on women and girls, it really does have the potential to be transformative as she's stepping into this new phase of her philanthropy journey. Her giving has undoubtedly brought unprecedented amounts of attention and resources to these areas that are underfunded. Our Women and Girls Index that we've published for the last 5 years showed most recently that in 2020, 1.8% of overall charitable dollars went to women's and girls' causes. And so by dedicating her resources to these causes, she's definitely moving the needle. And she's been really clear that data points like ours are driving her giving. But I will say that statistic, that less than 2% statistic, has been really persistent. Our data goes back at least to 2012. It's always been less than 2%. And Melinda seems to understand that her giving can't be the one thing that makes the difference. It has to spur others to give if it's going to be a lasting change and increase. And that's why the new approaches that she has announced recently are so important. She seems to be leveraging her influence beyond just her dollars to build a coalition that's dedicated to these causes.
Yeah, I think that's a really important point about the work that she's been doing to encourage others to give. You've been studying this for such a long time, and I would love to know, there are probably a lot of fundraisers in this audience who work with women, who want to expand the pool of women who give. Do you have some quick action steps, things that they should keep in mind that will make them more successful with women donors?
Absolutely. And I'm so glad that you asked this, because we don't just want to do research that sits in the ivory tower. We really want to translate our findings to concrete steps that fundraisers can use. So I would say, broadly, that distills down to pay attention to women. It is a little tragic that after 15 years, we're still saying this, but so much of our research shows that women have the power, they have the resources, and they have the motivation to give generously to all sorts of causes and organizations, but they're systematically overlooked, and that takes place at every step in the fundraising process. So I would say it should start with prospect research. We know that women often give lower amounts to a broader range of organizations. And so some of the typical ways of finding prospects exclude women who really do have the potential to give generously. And then fundraisers should make sure that they're including wives or other family members when they approach conversations with major donors that may have historically happened with just the men in the household. And finally, they need to be approaching women in ways that resonate with them, whether that's maybe not offering to name a building or a program after them, and focusing on the impact that those gifts are going to have on individuals and communities. And we have so many more examples and research that underlies those important points.
Thank you so much for these insights, all really helpful. And I hope that all the people in the audience will turn to Jacqueline's organization for yet more information. We're going to return to our wonderful panel. Jim, I'd love for you to return. And Kendra, Cecilia, and Elisha, we're dying to hear what else you have to say.
Great. Thanks, Stacy. Really interesting conversation. Thanks to both of you. So, back to the panelists, there's always been an implicit power dynamic in philanthropy and sometimes an explicit one, between grantees and grantors. I'm wondering if each of you could talk a little bit about that power dynamic and how MacKenzie Scott and Melinda French Gates are upending it or perhaps continuing to perpetuate it. So, Elisha, can you start and talk a little bit about what you've seen from your research?
Sure. So one of the big things that we've seen in our research is about the power that these gifts have to influence individual leadership at organizations. So what we heard a lot from leaders after receiving one of these gifts was just how, how in a lot of ways the investment was an investment in them, right? In their leadership, in showing that, there was support out there for the work that they were doing. And then that investment being a powerful tool for then leaders feeling more empowered to ask other funders for bigger gifts, to make different kinds of asks than they'd asked before. Maybe before they were asking for project support, and now they'd be more likely to ask for a general operating support grant to support the organization. The other thing that these gifts do in terms of shifting power, not only in terms of like helping leaders own their own power, and we heard this actually even a little bit more from leaders of color. So we heard that, leaders felt like they own their own power more and can make bigger asks. And we also heard from folks that they were able to invest in their staff and in their teams in different kinds of ways, right? So we know that often when organizations receive gifts that are, program-specific grants that they have to spend on like a certain type of programming they're doing, that can often prohibit them from investing in the very things that help them run the organization in the ways they like, whether that's additional staff, or one organization we talked to added a 401k program after they received the gift. There are other organizations who invested in wellness programs for staff, things that they wanted to do all along, but those aren't necessarily, the programmatic type grants that they've been receiving before. And so having a different kind of level of flexibility around how an organization can spend its own funds can also help to shift power, because it helps puts an organization in the power seat of making more decisions about how they're investing in their own organization as well.
All right, thanks. Cecilia?
Well, I think it's precisely that. It's this recognition that sometimes the knowledge about what the best thing to do to help really advance the work of an organization or to have the biggest impact on the community resides within that organization with the leadership. And that's something that's been expressed in the types of grant making that we've seen from both of these individuals. There is a transfer of agency from the donor to the organizations, to those who are in the field and close to the problem itself and understand it. I think the second piece of this is also a shift in who gets to make the decisions. And I mentioned this before about what gets funded. I mentioned it in the context of the open calls, where we rely on the organizations themselves to do reviews, but also the expert panels that are independent, that are not part of the donors team, to help shape that decision itself. But you see it play out in, for example, in the recent announcement from Melinda French Gates about actually identifying leaders in different areas and giving them control over a certain amount of resources to help basically broaden who gets to decide where this wealth is going to go towards making change happen. So that's also another piece of it. I'd say that we see in both of them, in just the language and in the themes that they work on. We had community-based, community-led organizations in the Yield Giving Open Call. In an earlier, a few years ago, we worked with Pivotal Ventures and with Melinda French Gates, MacKenzie Scott, and also a third donor, Stacy Schusterman, on a big open call to increase women's power and influence in the U.S. So there is a way of, and this goes back to, we talked about identifying root causes. And when you identify root causes, you are power shifting. You're not just saying, I'm going to make whatever is troubling you not feel so bad. It's, I'm going to try and make it go away, which is a real shift in how we can think about things.
Interesting. Yeah, it seems that often that involves sort of some distance between the donor and where the funding is going, right? The donor kind of being willing to say, okay, maybe I'm not the most informed, the best person to decide this. Maybe there are better experts that can make these decisions other than me. Kendra, what do you think?
Well, I'm complete agreement with Elisha and Cecilia. Giving nonprofits the opportunity to spend unrestricted money in the best way possible to advance their mission, stabilize their organizations, and grow their programs is really, it's game changing. I think many times nonprofits are beholden to the desires, the missions, if you will, of potential funders, and they put those first, and oftentimes twist themselves into a pretzel to make good on their promises to those funders to entice additional funding, subsequent funding that will help them sustain the programs that said funder is interested in. This kind of funding really says from the word go, we believe in what you're doing. We believe in your leadership. We believe in your track record and your ability to influence change, to help people. I go back to, and as I was listening to my colleagues talk, I go back to a quote by Simon Sinek: when people are financially invested, they want a return. When people are emotionally invested, they want to contribute. I think MacKenzie Scott and Melinda French Gates are very emotionally invested in advancing the nonprofits that are doing the work that they believe in. And I think empowering nonprofit leaders to make decisions about what they're going to do with the Holy Grail, which is unrestricted funding, is more than empowering. It's an affirming kind of gift. It says to these nonprofits, you're doing good, we believe in it, and we want to help you do more.
Great. Certainly with MacKenzie Scott's giving, we've seen, I think, a real sense of urgency about moving a lot of money, right? $17.5 billion in 5 years is a lot. It puts her on par with some of the larger foundations in the country who, are sort of perpetual foundations that only give out about 5% a year. She clearly is thinking very differently about the scale of giving and the speed of giving. I'm curious a little bit about, sort of how that's different and what that means. I think some people might say, well, there's going to be problems 50 years from now that her money maybe won't address, right? Or other people would say, well, problems are so severe now, we have to kind of, really put money in to address these. Cecilia, what's your thought on kind of the speed with which the funds are being spent?
So I believe that there's actually a need for multiple approaches in the philanthropic landscape. And we certainly have big issues right now, and we have a unprecedented level of wealth inequality that many people are cognizant of. And so there's certainly an urgency to help solve some of those problems, to move the philanthropic capital. That's what Lever for Change exists for, is to accelerate that, to help get some of those problems solved, to help address it. That's one piece. I do think that there is still space within the philanthropic landscape for people who want to follow the more historical traditional approach of putting money into an endowment and setting up a foundation and having that foundation go into perpetuity to exist to solve the problems that maybe one hasn't anticipated yet, to be there in the future. I think there's space for both of those. There's certainly right now enough resources to do those things simultaneously. They can be different people. They can be the same person doing multiple ones of those. So I'm both applauding those who are moving quickly to move wealth, particularly because they're still accumulating it as they move it, but also to those who are prepared to think about what they might set up long term. But I think there is a need for the money to flow every year, like not to just set it there and just wait.
Yeah. Elisha, I'm curious if in your research, when you talk to these organizations that are getting these large sums, right, which is kind of how the money is moving so quickly, do they talk about how they think about receiving, $10 million in one shot kind of affects their longevity and their ability to kind of pursue their mission over time? I mean, is there something about giving large sums, quickly that actually helps organizations to work more effectively long-term rather than sort of keeping it in an endowment and giving it out slowly to organizations over time?
Yeah, I mean, there are so many things that we heard from organizations just in terms of like how powerful receiving a gift in this way was. Some of the main things, one of the things I did mention before that came up often, maybe around 30 or 40% of folks use the gifts to actually start new collaborations with other organizations. And so, I think a lot of the times when we think about collaboration, we think about the great work that can come out of it. We don't think about the fact that like that means there's a group of humans here and a group of humans here who have to use work hours to come together and do that work. But we know that collaboration can lead to more powerful impact. And so, I found it really interesting that there was a not insignificant number of organizations who use the funds to do more collaborative work. And organizations also just talked about the power of being able to plan on their own terms with those funds. So whether it was for some of the internal measures I mentioned earlier that folks use the funds for their staff, or whether it was like deciding to set up their own endowment or increase their own reserves, there were just so many different ways that I think one of the most powerful lessons is that organizations had plans, right? Like they had things that they wanted to do. And one of the really interesting things that we also learned was when we interview funders, we often heard in those funder interviews that some of the reservations funders had about organizations receiving these types of gifts is like, oh, maybe they wouldn't be able to absorb it, or they wouldn't know how to spend it, or they wouldn't have a plan. And we actually found that organizations had a lot of plans. They just needed the resources to execute on them.
Great.
So true.
Thanks so much. So listen, thanks everybody. That was a great conversation. We're going to switch over to the Q&A portion. Let me start with one here that I think is an important question, and one I think a lot of all of us folks that look at the nonprofit world or in the nonprofit world wonder. And it's essentially, how much is this changing things, right? Like, are we seeing other philanthropists following suit, with more unrestricted giving? Philanthropy can move very slowly. I feel like, trust-based philanthropy has been a conversation for a long time, but maybe not as much action as talk. I'm curious, maybe Cecilia, from the folks you talk to, do you see real influence coming not just from the talking about this, but other philanthropists saying, hey, I want to do that too. Like, I want to give unrestricted funds. I want to move large sums quickly. I want to do some of the things that we see going on here.
I think the conversation among philanthropists has moved in this direction, both propelled by some of the giving that's happened, but also it was a conversation, as you've noted, that was already kind of happening, both about the importance of flexible funding, the importance of really thinking carefully about how much agency you give to the organizations in the field. We've had lots of funders who are now focusing attention on locally led organizations, or greater movement to localization. We see funders focusing on organizations with proximate leadership. So I've seen all of these kinds of conversations moving in this direction. I am hopeful. I mean, I think it may be a little early to see if we're going to have a lot of copycats, but I am hopeful that we'll see copycats happen.
Elisha, have you seen anything?
I mean, I agree with Cecilia that I think we're at a really exciting moment, and actually it's been really great to see Melinda French Gates come out so publicly. I think too, it'll be just important to watch. There are other folks who've also made these kinds of commitments. And I think they, both Melinda French Gates and MacKenzie Scott have been on really the leading edge of like holding true to some of those commitments. And I think, we'll be watching and waiting to see if others follow suit. But I remain hopeful because we are at a moment where, more than ever, it's a moment where resources should be being distributed, not held on to, because there's so much work to do. So I remain hopeful that happens.
So one person asks regarding the open call model, could you clarify at which stage the participatory review and panel review is conducted? Is it during the application stage, the proposal stage, someplace further down in the process? Can you talk a little bit more about how that works?
Yes. There is an application stage, and for most of our challenges, so certainly for the yield giving open call, there was really only one application. And so the application itself goes through multiple stages of review. In that particular model, the participatory review was the very first stage. And then after the participatory review, those that scored highly went to a second stage with the evaluation panel. And then the awardees were announced. Sometimes in our other challenges, and I'll note, I should have noted this earlier, that we've worked with lots of other donors who've been willing to come on board with this model. So there are some copycats out there. I should have said that. In many of those, at the very end of the top level, there's a group of finalists who are selected, and those finalists actually have an opportunity, because these are project-based grants, to rewrite their proposals and to take into account the feedback that they've gotten from those different levels of review. And they get support from us to help them do that. So that's slightly different from the open call model.
So one person is sort of asked a question I think that probably a lot of nonprofit executives are curious about. So Kendra, maybe you can address this, is what it's like to get the call, right? Like, can you talk a little bit about that process? How much engagement do you have or not have with the yield folks prior to finding out you get it? Is it just out of the blue? What is that process like, just in terms of talking to the folks at Yield and getting the call that you've got the grant?
Well, I wasn't fortunate enough to have been at Easter Seals when they got the call. I've been there for, the past 2.5 years and have really seen again how impactful that funding has been. So I'm waiting. I'm waiting for my chance to get that call, and then I'll be able to come back and answer that question. But I can say, as someone who's spent, my entire career in nonprofit philanthropy and development, it is so ingratiating, it's fulfilling, it's empowering, it's really fortifying for nonprofits to receive that kind of support and that vote of confidence. And that's what a call like that is to any nonprofit. It's a vote of confidence. And if I could just go back for a second, talk about something Elisha was saying, regarding whether or not nonprofits, regardless of size, can handle this kind of support. I would say that the vast majority of nonprofits in the US are very strategic about what they do with their funding, that the vast majority have plans, things they would do if they could do it, if they had the funding to do it. And again, I know we keep saying it, but it bears reminding, gifts like this really empower and influence nonprofits, regardless of size, regardless of their tenure and longevity, their ability to do their job, which is often to cure, to address, to facilitate some of society's solutions to society's biggest problems. And if I look at Easter Seals, I think, well, you know what? Our mission is only growing. The number of people with disabilities in the United States is 1/4 of our population, 61 million Americans. Our work is far from being done. And instead, I think our work just continues to grow. And one of the things that I consider a hallmark of Easter Seals is that we never say no. That's a blessing and a curse, right? We do the work that is so difficult for other organizations. And what can be very, very challenging for a nonprofit like Easter Seals and all of our 70 affiliates is saying yes when you know you need to say yes, saying no when you don't want to have to say no. Funding like this really takes that level of angst out of the equation. And again, to I think Elisha's point, puts nonprofit leaders in the driver's seat. It is, you know, again, hate to be repetitive, but it's transformative giving. And I hope it continues. And I hope there are a lot of copycats, because there are certainly thousands of nonprofits across the United States that would benefit from that kind of support.
Great, thanks. So there's an interesting question here about reporting, right? And I think there are a few different ways that organizations and people in the field think about it. Sometimes it can be onerous, and a lot of time and effort that nonprofit leaders feel like could be better spent doing their work. On the other hand, it is one way to understand the impact of the money that you're giving. And I know, so Center for Effective Philanthropy was given funds from MacKenzie Scott, which were used to do some of this research as in a sense, a kind of research-based reporting, right? To understand some of how these funds were used and what's worked out. I'm curious, for starters, is Lever for Change, are there reporting requirements with the funds that you're giving out? And then more broadly, I'd like you to just talk a little bit about that question of how you know what the impact is. This is a lot of money going out really quickly to a ton of organizations. Maybe there are important things to learn about what's working and what's not that maybe are getting overlooked. Are there problems with not really drilling down on the impact or the reporting coming back from organizations about how these funds are being used?
So when I talk about Lever for Change, there are kind of two parts to it. The way we work with a donor to identify the grantees, and then the grants are made by the donor. The reporting requirements are defined by the donor. In many of our challenges, the reporting requirements are designed to be both simple to inform about impact, but also to give space to allow opportunities where there's project grants to pivot, to change. So the actual requirements vary depending on who the donor might be. But on the other side of it, the highest scoring applicants in our challenges, our finalists generally, sometimes it's more than that, become part of what we call the Bold Solutions Network, which is a set of organizations that we continue to work with long after an initial challenge has ended. For 2-3 years, we provide learning opportunities. We also help to connect them with funders through a really active process of reaching out to funders, providing them with information about these pre-vetted projects to make it easier for them to find something exciting that they might be able to support. The organizations who participate in the Bold Solutions Network have a yearly refresh expectation and to update us on their work. And that, again, is intended to be information that they would typically collect, and we encourage that they continue to collect and track. Most of our challenges have required that organizations have some kind of track record. So I think it is important for organizations to be prepared to be able to tell a story about impact. It helps not only as they're trying to raise funds from other donors, but it also even helps to tell the story about the impact of giving, like we've seen from Scott, like some of the Lever for Change challenges, which might be used then to encourage the copycatting that we all want to see more of.
Got one more question, which I think is an interesting one. This is somebody who's writing, they say as a small organization who has not been a recipient of a gift like this, do you have any words of wisdom or how to respond to our supporters who make comments like, just go ask MacKenzie Scott or Melinda French Gates for a gift? But, it can be a real issue. We ran an op-ed from somebody who runs an organization where, they felt that the other organizations in their field, a few of them got grants from MacKenzie Scott and they did not. And they felt that a lot of the work that they had done to pioneer approaches to their issue, was not being recognized, and that they were kind of left behind, and that this in some ways is picking winners and losers. Sometimes I know the Lever for Change process is fairly transparent, but the yield giving process is kind of a black box, for organizations. They just don't know why somebody got it and somebody didn't. What do you say to that? I mean, is there an impact on fundraising for groups that don't get these grants, and are they maybe just left out in the cold? Anybody?
Can I address that? I'll just answer. I think regardless of the size of support or grants, you're always going to have that. And I think you need to just remain true to your mission. You need to keep, like I tell my children, bad days, good days, put one foot in front of the other. Keep doing what you do best, and people will notice. But one thing I think we haven't covered that is really important, and hopefully we'll respond to this question, is that gifts like this allow nonprofits to look at their programs most holistically, not necessarily just what they need to execute on programmatically to get additional support or renewed support, but how do they drive people to their programs, looking at their brand, their marketing, their leadership, their staff, how they support that kind of giving and those kind of grants is really important. I think to someone who wants that kind of support, you need to ask for it. You need to show up. You need to be visible. You need to be your own best champion. And I think it all comes back to storytelling. Tell your story to the biggest number of people, and people will eventually come to you, and you will get that support. You might not get a call from MacKenzie Scott or Melinda French Gates, but other supporters will come to your aid.
Great, thank you. So on that note, we are out of time. So listen, thanks to everybody in the audience for all the great questions. Just a reminder, we've been recording this session, so please be on the lookout for an email from the Chronicle that will give you access to the video. We're also offering a special promotion on Chronicle of Philanthropy subscriptions. Visit philanthropy.com/sub50 for more information, or scan the QR code that you see on the screen now. To each of our panelists, Cecilia Conrad, Elisha Smith, Arrillaga, and Kendra Davenport, thank you for sharing your expertise today. And thanks again to CCS Fundraising and the Lilly School of Philanthropy for helping to make this event possible. This concludes our forum. Have a great day. Thank you.